everyone. I am so excited today to have Hilda Gore here, also known as Holistic Hilda. I appreciate so much you taking the time to come on and have this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Well, I love hearing people's personal stories of how they got into this realm, and I'm all for those inspiring healing stories. And I know you have one of your own, so I'd love if you would just share a little bit of your own health history and all of that.
It's so crazy to think that my health story begins before I was even born. When I was in utero, so the story goes, my mother went to the hospital because my 2-year-old sister at the time, my older sister, had like double pneumonia or something. So my mom went to the hospital, and the roommate of my sister in the hospital had the German measles. And so this is known as rubella. And even today, doctors say if a pregnant woman is exposed to rubella or the German measles, her baby is going to be born with a serious birth defect. You can Google this. You'll find out. People will have babies that are blind or unable to speak or hear. Something bad is going to happen. So the doctors were like, oh no. And they told her, you might not even want to have this baby. Actually, I think it was recommended that she not have me altogether. But my mom was a person of faith, and she's like, oh, I'm going to have this baby. And what's so cool, Jen, is that the doctors didn't notice anything at first, but I was born with a birth defect, but it was corrected. And let me explain what it was. So it was a hole in my heart, literally a hole between the lower two ventricles. It's called a ventricle septal defect. And the blood was flowing basically in a direction it shouldn't flow in. It wasn't oxygenating properly. The doctors weren't sure, like, is this going to heal on its own? They monitored me for a number of years, but they were able to correct it through open heart surgery when I was 9 years old. And it even blows my mind to tell you this story because I just remember being in the hospital room the night before the surgery, and I was nervous and I didn't know what to expect. And the nurse came in and she's like, okay, it's time for your enema. And I was like, enema? And she goes, don't you know what that is? I was like, no. And then she started kind of muttering under her breath. I thought she was mad at me, but later I realized she was upset that no one had told me or prepped me. I mean, here I was, this little 9-year-old kid about to have this procedure. And my parents, God bless them, which I do too, they had actually gone to the movies to distract themselves so they wouldn't be thinking about what was coming. Anyway, so there I was by myself, getting an enema, all the things. And then they did this open heart surgery. Here's the good news. The surgery was successful. The doctors were like, okay, now you can do whatever you want. And I was like, oh my gosh, like to have a clean bill of health after kind of a shaky childhood where I wasn't sure what my body was capable of meant a lot. But I was like, okay, now what am I going to do? So there were two things I wanted to do right off the bat. I wanted to thank God because I was like, okay, I feel like I was protected in the womb. It could have been so much worse, and then he used the surgeon's skill to save me is how I felt. And then the second thing is I want to help people live as healthy and be as strong for as long as possible. So that became my life's mission.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, to start from such adversity. And I think you're so right. Like so many people today, their health story does not start with them. It starts with what their mother was exposed to or what their grandmother was exposed to. So I so appreciate you like zooming out and really recognizing like we're dealt cards, like we can't control sometimes, what kind of situation we're born into. And we just have to do the best we can with it. And so what was that like for you? Like, what do you feel like the lessons you learned were, having such a different experience before the age of 9 and then having this healing experience and having this new lease on life? Like, do you feel like that taught you any specific lessons?
I think so. I think it taught me resilience and perseverance because I didn't just go into the hospital when I was 9. There were a series of visits where they would monitor my heart and I would have to swallow like this barium thing. And then they would do an x-ray. Like this was in the olden days, And so there were a lot of procedures, catheterizations, things where they were kind of checking things out. Now the surgery that I had when I was 9, they can do in utero. Like that's what's so amazing, right? But back then it was like open heart surgery, big deal. So yes, I became more resilient and realized too, some things are out of my control, like the heart situation I didn't know what to do about. But once I was told, okay, you can do whatever you want, I started exercising. I started moving my body because I thought, I love this body and I want to make it strong. And I'll never forget in my teen years, my mom would look at me doing curls and she's like, oh no, your heart's going to explode. Like she was worried. But I knew the heart is a muscle. And if I do cardio and if I work out, I'm going to strengthen that muscle. And so I took ownership of what I could. And I think that's one of the lessons. Another lesson I will say is that, as they say, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Like, this really brought me to my knees and helped me understand that there is a greater power overseeing my life. It really brought me to my knees in an early age. So I was like, okay, I'm God's, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Again, remembering that some things are out of my control and some things are within my control, but the things that are out of my control are not out of the greater power's control. So there was a real sense of trust and confidence in all of that.
Yeah. And these are the qualities that I see people need in order to overcome the obstacles that their life gives them. I mean, you're giving such a great summary of it, right? That it's like letting go control of the things that you can't, taking ownership of the things that you can control, and then having a greater sense of surrender to whatever higher power, or sense of the universe that you personally have. So it's like you just got a crash course in these lessons at such a young age. That's incredible.
I did. And then what's funny, because I know your audience is a lot of people struggling with chronic conditions. My best friend, literally my best friend on this planet, has been sick for over 20 years. So she has, as a lot of people do, a variety of issues from, Lyme to heavy metal toxicity to electromagnetic sensitivity, allergies and sensitivities to foods. I mean, just the list could go on and on. She could tell you better than I do. Mold sensitivity, all the things. And I have actually walked hand in hand with her over these years. And the thing that I think has helped her the most, and I maybe should have saved this for the end, but I'll just tell you right now, is actually things of the spirit. So she took some Tony Robbins thing, and you might be like, oh, brother, unleash the power within, he's a big salesman or whatever. But he had some suggestions about keeping a positive framework for your life and for each day, which for her, it's a struggle to get through, right? And so she started kind of reframing her days and has found, if nothing else, Jen, like a greater sense of peace, of joy, of contentment, and of I can manage, that she has heretofore not really had. And because there have been days where the pain is weighing heavy on her, whether it's a flare up of Lyme or another tick bite, for goodness sakes. Oh my, I'm like, how many tick bites can she get? Like, it's really rough, but she finds that helps. And you probably have heard the recent study that everyone's touting that they looked at the top 25 tennis athletes and champions in the world. And the difference between the top 5 and the other 20 is that the top 5, whenever they hit an obstacle, they deliberately shift their mindset to positive. They don't replay the negative last point that they lost, let's say. They shift it to positive. And this is the difference between the top 5 and the top 25. All of them are great with their diet. It's all dialed in. The movement, obviously the sleep, I'm sure that's all dialed in. But the mindset is the difference between champions and almost their champions.
Oh, that's fascinating. I hadn't heard that one, but I absolutely believe it. And, it's so funny how you're bringing this up, because what is really, when we're talking about healing or recovering from a chronic condition, I mean, what are we really looking for, right? We're looking for a better quality of life. We're looking for more purpose. We're looking for more well-being. We're looking for more peace. And I do see this over and over, exactly what you're talking about. You could be objectively having symptoms of chronic illness, but be a, peaceful, positive, giving, compassionate person that has found their purpose in life, has found their meaning in life. And it's like, is that not healing? Really? Like, what are we trying to do here ultimately? And I think sometimes people get so fixated on very particular physical symptoms going away that they miss the bigger picture of what healing actually means.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so true. And of course, I've interviewed so many people who point in that direction of what you're saying on the Wise Traditions podcast. I think of Bruce Lipton and, of course, Tommy John and Dr. Cassie Huckabee. They say things like, your life is your medicine, so we can choose every day, is this moment going to be healing or aggravating? And that's not to say, I mean, I absolutely get aggravated. We all have our obstacles, but then it's like, how do we manage that when it comes our way? And I can either focus on that thing that's really bothering me, either physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever it is, or I can focus on the bigger picture and have gratitude. And I think the latter helps rewire the neurons in my brain so that the more I'm grateful, the more I can see what I have to be grateful for. And that even can help me refocus when I hit the next pain point.
Right, exactly. And ultimately, it's my experience, healing has been that yes, all the physical things like doing gut healing, getting my nutrition on point, like doing detox protocols, like working on my circadian rhythm, like all these kind of things, like that did take away some of the most severe of my symptoms. Absolutely. Like that part is important. But I found that in terms of like kind of last lingering things or the kind of things that were still nagging and still bothering me, that kind of stuff didn't change until I really started doing this deep mindset work you were talking about and basically living my life as if I was perfectly grateful for everything that was happening. And it's like sometimes you have to act like everything is resolved for the nervous system to get the message that it's actually okay to be okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I'm so glad you mentioned the nervous system. So I have so many stories I want to tell. I'm torn between where to begin, but I will tell you one about when I was in Ecuador in 2021. So this was shortly after the big pandemic. As a matter of fact, I was going to invite people to go with me to Ecuador, but people were still afraid and there were restrictions in place and so forth. So I made my way down there with a friend who was a native Ecuadorian, and she took me around and she took me to a small Quechuan village. I think they also call themselves Quechua. So among the Quechua people. And I was connected with this man I speak Spanish, of course, but his English was pretty good. He was like a bridge between the Spanish speakers, the Quechua community, and then outsiders. And I think I fell into the latter category, even though I spoke Spanish. But anyway, so I was sitting there with him and his wife, Christina, and they said, last year, a lot of people in our community became sick with COVID. It was 2020, and I think they had their annual festival around the summer solstice around June 21st, and a lot of people got sick. And she said, what we did, Christina said, is we gathered medicinal plants and herbs, and we took them to every household that was affected. And I think it was about 20 plants and herbs. And she said, Hilda, no one was hospitalized and no one died. And literally, Jen, my first thought was, can I see the list? And I did ask. I was like, can I see the list of those plants and healing plants and medicinal herbs? Because people need to know, I never saw the list. But then I also remembered this, Jen, that it probably wasn't just those plants and herbs that help people heal. It was the context in which they were given. And that context was love and support. And so I'm sharing this now because it's very easy to think that healing is right around the corner with a particular protocol or application of a new approach to healing. And that may be the case, and I pray that that's the case for a lot of folks who are still seeking healing. But what if you were able to be grateful right now, as you were saying? What if you were able to receive love? And isn't that healing? There are people who are perfectly well in body right now, but whose spirits are troubled. The man with $1 million in the bank may be a poorer man than the one with $0 in his bank account, because it has to do with some of these spirit things. So I love that I had that conversation with this woman, because I realized, oh my gosh, like the food and the healing doesn't come just from the physical stuff. It can come from the spiritual as well.
Yeah, because here she is with her husband going around to everyone's house, like personally delivering this medicine and probably saying caring things and wishing them well. And you're right, that's the context. It's the context of love. And I think most people like certainly don't trust their doctors. But even alternative clinicians, I think there is a growing, at least I'm noticing in people I'm talking to, that there's a growing feeling of distrust even among alternative practitioners, because there are people who are well, full on scam artists, of course, unfortunately. But then there's people that they are using this very clinical, almost like Western light kind of mindset when they're doing alternative practices. And I think people are not getting well because, again, the love isn't there. And then people have gone to all these different coaches and practitioners and doctors. And I mean, I see people who have been to, 20, 30 different practitioners sometimes. And so they have no trust left. They're like, I don't know if I can believe anything you're telling me. And it's like, how are you going to heal when there's no trust, there's no love?
Yes. And Tommy John actually spoke to that. I think I called that Wise Traditions episode, You Heal You. He said they're parallel systems. You've got the conventional one here where they're passing out pharmaceutical drugs. Then you've got the alternative one over here where they're passing out supplements, And in either case, we're outsourcing. And so this is where, and I don't know too much about this, but I do want to say, like, the German New Medicine idea comes in, that you heal you, that you identify the trauma, that you recognize it, and that healing comes from some work that you do. It's not something that someone outside of you can take care of. But speaking to that, I also want to mention, you were talking about the nervous system. And I think this is really important to bring up. Are you hearing music? Oh, okay, okay. No, it's good. I was just like, is this my imagination? Is this one of my former Mercury fillings? It's gone now, but anyway, like I'm getting signals of music in the back. Anyway, and I live in the city, so I can relate. What I was going to say is, as I've traveled the world, and I'm happy to tell more stories shortly, I have found that some of the most basic things, the things you were even mentioning at the top that helped you get some healing, are often overlooked because of their simplicity. And I have met with Indigenous peoples around the world, some Aboriginal women in Australia, some tribes along the Omo Valley in Ethiopia last summer, and so forth. And what I found is there are commonalities and simple things that we can do that I'm not saying will cause everything you have to go into remission, but I suggest, and I've seen this happen, can bring people up to the starting line. Like, a lot of us feel like we're way behind the starting line. Like, I just want to get so I can function every day and be with my toddler, or, like, people's goals are very modest, but they're feeling way behind the 8 ball. And it's like, my hope is by introducing what I call the 6 ancestral secrets, but really I'm looking for ways to remind people that there are simple things we can do that can help settle our nervous system so that healing can indeed begin. Because if you're on edge and still feeling like you're in fight or flight, that is not the time that your body feels safe to heal or go into any healing modalities. It's still stressed. And what you want to do is get out of that mode so that your body knows, okay, it's time to get ready and heal.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, on that note, I really did want to ask you about your travels. You mentioned a little bit of Ecuador, and I would just love to hear some of the most fascinating things that you've learned about health, nutrition, well-being. I just love to hear some stories.
What comes to mind immediately was an experience I had with the Dasanach tribe. So again, I visited 5 tribes along the Omo Valley with my friend Mary Ruddick, who is a fellow experiential anthropologist, we call ourselves, because we don't have a degree, but we love to just go and experience and connect and learn. And so we were there, and in this tribe, actually, scarification is a thing. So they deliberately put scars on their body to beautify. And, before we're too quick to judge, let me remind people about tattoos and earrings, like in the Western culture.
Exactly.
We do things to beautify our bodies, lest we judge. But anyway, and so I'll never forget, I met this woman and she had all this decorative scarring on her back. And I said to her, in English, in the most simple terms I could to communicate, I said, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. And then she said, when she saw my surgery scar, Jen, she said, your scar is beautiful, along those lines. And I was like, oh, no one had ever told me that before, not even my husband. And I just want to say to the person right now who is really struggling and maybe feeling like you're at your wit's end, I just want to say, somehow there is beauty in what you've gone through. There is a purpose for it. Think of the little caterpillar and the chrysalis, and you've probably heard this before, but if you open up the chrysalis so the caterpillar can get out quicker and turn into a butterfly, it dies. There's something about that process that must happen for it to emerge strong and to fly strong. So I'm saying this as a person who is fellow scarred. If you are like
Yes.
struggling right now, like I can't take it, hang in there, because there's something
Yeah.
beautiful about what you're going through, and maybe even something redemptive. And along those lines, I have to say, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it weren't for the struggle I went through, where I was like, okay, I want my body to be strong and healthy for as long as possible. And then I want to help other people do the same. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for that. My friend Mary Reddick, she had a condition known as dysautonomia. Like, she was so sick, Jen. I don't know if people know this, but she was, I don't like to use this term, but bedbound. She was laying in bed.
Yeah.
She couldn't get up. She was so sick. Her mom had to get her a little holder for a book because she couldn't even hold a book in her hands.
Yeah.
And now Mary is the picture of health. And in part, I think it's because she has applied what I call these 6 secrets. She's applied some basic things to improve her health. And I will just tell you one right off the bat that I saw even in Ethiopia last summer, but I've seen it in Mongolia and in Ecuador, like everywhere I've gone. And this is what I call sunrise before screen rise. It's getting the early morning sunlight, because I used to be like, oh, the sunrise, it's too early for me. Give me any number past 8 o'clock on the clock and I'm good. Like, I just wanted to sleep till 8 or 9 a.m. and I would stay up late. I'm Latina, I was like that. That's just how it is. It's in my genes. But what I realized is, when you get that early morning light, it does wonders for your health. It sets your circadian rhythm. It actually connects to what they call the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. And it is a receptor that is a master clock that sets the clocks in every cell in your body. And again, you might be thinking, who cares about the clocks in my body? No, let me explain. This regulates so many functions in the body, your hormonal functions, your cognitive function. Like, you need everything to be regulated by this clock. And so think about it when you travel, and I do this all the time. When I get to a new place, like, my body feels off. Why? Because I don't know what time it is. And there's something about the natural rhythms that my body needs to sync up again with. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying people need to get up as early as sunrise. I know that might be a stretch for some. So I just say sunrise before screen rise. I get out personally within 30 to 45 minutes of sunrise. I'm out there for at least 15 minutes. I'm often out there longer, but that's how I roll with my schedule. But I try to get that sun in my eyes. It's setting the clocks in my body. It helps me sleep better at night, more profoundly. It signals to my body when to produce melatonin and when to release it, like all these things. As a matter of fact, it also helps with the metabolism. And I have a friend who has lost weight just because he started this healthy habit of getting that morning sun.
Wow.
So whatever people are going through, again, this gets you up to the starting line. Get that sun before the screen, first thing. And then at the end of the day, honor your light hygiene. By that, I mean, avoid the bright lights that are often just blue in the spectrum, which is very stimulating. It stimulates cortisol and kind of wakes you up. And what you want instead is red light. If you don't have red light, wear blue blockers. But this mimics what I've seen around the world. Among the Ethiopian tribes, for example, there was no electricity in these little huts they lived in. When the sun went down, it was candles or fire or nothing. And so they were very attuned to nature's rhythms. And though, I won't even say though, they also had other benefits of just eating real food that they hunted or, harvested themselves. The community connection, that's not to be underestimated, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the Ecuador COVID context. But the sun, I think the sun is much more healing than we realize. So that's one of the ancestral secrets I point to that I've seen over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like you mentioned before, like, it's the simplest things that sometimes make the biggest difference for us, right? Like, people love to jump straight to the so-called like biohacking or, the intensive supplement protocols, or think they have to go see the most advanced specialist when they're not in tune with their circadian rhythm. And it's like, get those basics in first. Like, those are those secrets to health.
I love it so much. A friend of mine calls it redox before detox. And I really like the sound of that.
Yeah,
so before you start doing the liver flush and the colon cleanse, which all sound very dramatic. And since I had that enema when I was 9, I'm like, never again. I have to admit, I'm a little afraid of those things. But can I reduce my oxidative stress? Yes. Getting out in the sun is important. Grounding is important too, right? Like, literally getting your feet on the ground. As adults, we're kind of walking around always insulated from the earth. We've got our
Yeah.
rubber soled shoes and our rubber tires on our car. And I mean, most people can't remember the last time they were barefoot. And the thing is, what we don't realize is we've got this toxic load of non-native electromagnetic, let me say it again, non-native electromagnetic frequencies that weigh us down and create this positive charge in our body that actually doesn't have positive health effects. It causes these
Right.
free radicals to start floating around, just waiting for a chance to start cancer. And so when you get your feet on the ground, the way I say it in ancestral terms, it's the Pachamama, like your mother nature, saying, give me that heavy load and I'm going to give you something
Oh,
lighter in exchange for it, something that's actually good for you. It's like your mom saying, let me carry
yeah.
your backpack for you. So Mother Nature is like, give me
Oh,
that heavy load. Let me give you something better. And so in return, we get these negative ions and they attach to free radicals. So help prevent cancer, lower the cortisol levels, get our nervous system back into balance, like all these things. So I suggest getting our feet on the ground for that
hmm.
redox before detox. And if you're like, oh no, where I live, it's too cold, I could never go barefoot, I might end up with frostbite or something. Well, what I do in the wintertime, honestly, is I touch the trees a lot. Like I literally will
Oh,
lean
yeah.
against a tree and try to get that. The tree is a conduit for the earth's energy for that healing
Yes.
response.
Yeah. There's always a way around. I love those little tips and hacks of how to do these things. I know living in the northern hemisphere, it's like I talk about this all the time. It's like, okay, grounding, sunlight, like that's tough in January when, you're in the northeast or something, but there's always little ways around things. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And, I do have a friend who I'm going to go see in Alaska in April. She invited me to this expo up there. And we've been talking a lot about light and the elements.
Uh-huh.
And I think wherever in the world we are, I think it's important to experience the elements. So even when
Yes.
it's really, really freaking cold out there, we see influencers and biohackers getting in ice tubs, but you don't have to do that to
Right.
experience the benefits of cold adaptation. Sometimes
Yeah.
Earth is on your side with that, right? So instead of going outside all bundled up, maybe go out with one less layer. Or I do
Yeah.
shiver walks and I'm getting acclimated now to the colder climes by going outside in shorts and a t-shirt, and it's getting to the time where everyone's starting to wear jackets, but I'm not, because I'm purposely challenging my body, because that's what our
Yeah.
ancestors would have done. And
Yeah.
it is so good for my mitochondrial health and for my
Mm-hmm.
resilience and my mindset. I start thinking, wow, if I can do 30 minutes at 30 degrees, like what else can I do today? So it's really, really beneficial. And this is something I saw when I went to Mongolia. So the Mongolian people are a hardy and resilient people. As a matter of fact, they were known, centuries ago as conquerors. Their Ottoman
Right.
Empire was always expanding because they were so hale and hardy. And I think in part it's because they are in very tough conditions.
Right.
Mongolia is between Russia and China, so it's like really cold over there. And what they do, they still cover up, but they're out there milking the yaks or riding their horses to go get firewood or whatever it is, the yak manure that they can use to burn in their little gurs or huts, for
Yeah.
fuel and warmth. And I was astounded by the strength and resilience of the Mongolian people. I got to be with some Kazakh eagle hunters. So they're the ones that use the eagles to go get prey for food and for fur. And so
Yeah.
they were like, hey, like we can let you try it too. And they let a little eagle perch on my arm. Little is the wrong word. This thing weighed like 40 pounds, Jen.
Oh
I
my
was like,
goodness.
my knees were shaking. I'm like trying to hold this thing up. And I was like,
Yeah.
So their day to day is experiencing the elements, but also movement, right? So that's another
Yes.
way in which Mary and I both, we challenge ourselves physically because your body will respond to the inputs it's given. So when I exercise, there are times I want to be like, okay, I'm done. But I always know there's a little bit more in the tank and I push myself a little bit more. So there's a fine line there about challenging yourself and what that
Of
looks like,
course.
especially when you're dealing with chronic illness. But I
Yes.
just want to encourage people, if all you can move is your pinky, move that
Yeah.
pinky. Because just
Yeah.
like languages, you either use it or you lose it. And I know because I used to be a
Yeah.
translator and my French is only assez right now, comme ci, comme ça. Like I need to work on it
Right.
because I haven't been using it. But same goes with every muscle in the body, So strength,
Yeah.
experiencing the elements, sunlight, and yeah, shivers, I call it. Like get out there
Yes.
because it's going to do your body some good.
Yeah. And I love the way you're framing these things as just things you just integrate into your lifestyle. Like you're going on a walk anyway, like, okay, leave your jacket at home, like touch a tree, you know? And I think sometimes people hear this stuff as like, oh my gosh, all these things I have to put on my to-do list every morning, you know? And it becomes another stressor. But it's like, ancestrally, this is just life, right? And so it's just intentionally making your life in a way where we can get some of these benefits. Um,
Yep.
I am curious too. I mean, I know you've been involved with the Weston A. Price Foundation for quite some time. And I'm curious how the things you learned, maybe the things you read from Weston A. Price or things you learned from the foundation, like things that matched up or didn't match up when you started doing your own traveling and your own experiential anthropology. I'm just so curious what your experience was with that.
Thank you so much for asking. I'm so excited to answer that because I love the Weston A. Price Foundation. And I started my travels in part, Jen, because I wanted to follow in the footsteps of Dr. Weston Price. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, about 100 years ago, he was a dentist and researcher that traveled the world trying to find the healthiest people on the planet. And he knew they would be, he wanted to find actually people untouched by the modern lifestyle and the modern foods. So he went into tucked away little places in Scotland and in Switzerland and Australia and Alaska. And he kept meticulous records because he was a researcher. And he wrote this book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And he made note particularly of what people were eating. And every healthy tribe that he came across over his 10 years, a decade of research in at least 14 countries, was these people were eating their traditional, local, organic, seasonal foods. So
Hmm.
traditional, local, organic, and seasonal. That they were organic because that was the case at that time. Like nobody was spraying all these
Yes.
pesticides. That's what was available, right? It was local because it was
Yeah.
right there. It was growing right there. Traditional because it had served their people well. So some of these things, again, in our modern lives, the thing is I can eat blueberries and bananas all year round. I'm not, even living in the places where those things grow. So we
Yeah.
might have to, in this area of sustenance, be a bit more intentional than in
Yeah.
any other area, I would say. Because
Yeah.
when we honor that kind of rhythm and we get in touch with what's growing right where we are, I think that can be more of a match and a healing help. Dr. Jack Kruse, who is this famous neurosurgeon who's done a lot of study in this area of quantum physics and quantum biology and health, says that it's a biological mismatch when we eat
Yeah.
foods from places where we currently are not. And most people,
Yeah.
as you see, are out there eating, all kinds of stuff with impunity. Like it doesn't matter because they apparently seem well. But I think A, either it'll catch up with them, or B, there's no need to look at them because they're making their own choices. What we need to
Yeah.
do is be intentional where we are, especially if we're on a healing journey. Um,
Yeah.
so, anyway, but to answer your question, yeah, I was following in the footsteps of Dr. Price. I was extremely curious about the places he'd been, which is why in 2019 I went to Australia and
Okay.
I got to connect with some Aboriginal women. From different tribes, because just like the Native
Yeah.
American tribes, the Aborigines are made up of a lot of different tribes. And one
Hmm.
woman said to me something that I think can be very valuable wherever you or anyone listening to this podcast may be at in the healing journey. She said, in our culture, we have the custom of Didiri, which is a custom of deep listening.
Hmm.
So it's kind of stillness and I would say discernment. And
Hmm.
this one woman, Suzanne, she calls herself Suzanne, the rainmaker of the Inangai tribe. Suzanne told me, she goes, Hilda, I was at one time going to be a Vidal Sassoon hairdresser. She goes, until I started listening to my dreams, even. She said, and that's where I
Uh-huh.
felt like I was being called to something else. And now, Jen, she has custodianship over an area, I mean, hectares and hectares of land that once was a part of the customs of her Inangai people in Australia. They don't say it belonged to anyone, but so it was
Sure.
a place that her people occupied. And now she's in
Hmm.
charge of that and overseeing it and kind of taking custodianship of it. Yes. And so she's just in this beautiful place because she stopped to listen. And so
Wow.
I have done more of that than ever before. And, I've been a Christian for years, and there is a verse in the Bible that says, be still and know that I am God. So I kind of knew
Hmm.
that intellectually. But
Yeah.
stillness was not in my vocabulary or in my
Yeah.
day-to-day life because I'm more of a human being, doing than a human being. But anyway, but I've learned the power of that and really tuning in. Am I hungry right now even? Or do I want to do
Yeah.
this? And sometimes there are times when I want to build my resilience. So I'll get in an ice bath or whatever, even if I don't particularly feel like it. But more often than not, my body has answers if I dare to be still and listen. So it could be your body. It could be your ancestors communicating with you. It could be God. I just think stillness is really important for discernment. And so that goes hand in hand with another lesson I learned from Price that I'll just tell quickly. It was in his book where he said he was wondering why the Native Americans, and I think it was the Seminole Indians, if I'm not mistaken, that he visited in Florida, in the Florida region, I believe. And he was talking to them and he was asking them why they didn't get scurvy because they mostly had a diet of meat and there wasn't a lot of fruit. And at the time, scurvy was on the rise. And so he was asking questions. And finally, after some time, they relented and told him, the moose has some glands that we harvest periodically, chop up, and we give a piece to every tribe member. And there was something in that gland that had vitamin C, I think, and that helped them prevent scurvy. And Dr. Price said something like, well, why haven't you told other people this? And the answer from the Native American was this: the white man knows too much. And I think Dr. Price took that to mean that when we don't have curiosity, when we think we know it all, we're not going to get to the answers. So this goes hand in hand with what my friend in Australia was saying. Like, I think if we're still and we have curiosity, we will be led down the right path.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to let that sink in for a moment. That's so beautifully said. And I see, just connecting this back to our conversation earlier, I think, and like the spiritual unwellness that you were talking about, right? So much of what is going on with people today is that they are out of alignment, probably out of alignment, like structurally, taller, like screen looking, but then also out of alignment with listening to their heart, their true self, messages from God, from spirit, from the universe, however they're defining it. And so many people lack quietness or they're afraid of quietness. So I'm curious because you mentioned that like stillness was not in your vocabulary before this. And so many people, when they first try to bring more stillness and quietness into their life, it actually makes them feel more agitated or makes them feel more anxious. They're not used to it. Like, did you experience that? And how did you get over that hump personally?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I have to be honest, I'm not very still with my body, but I'm still with my mind. And this is how I do it. It's the more I connect with nature, the more still I can be. I take a morning walk, as I said earlier, and 15 minutes is very much underestimating what I do. I go for about 45 minutes to an hour. And as I'm walking, I am praying, I'm being still, I'm listening. Even though physically I'm moving, I am quieting my spirit. I'm also starting my day, Jen, on my own terms. Because what happens is we just end up in this kind of reactive mode, like, oh, I've got an email or I see this, thing that entertained me for a second, but then depressed me later. Like, what's my life about? We lose our way far too easily. And I think the stillness reminds me of who I am and it grounds me so that as my day begins, I can stand strong and face whatever it is. So I really make an effort to start my day on my own terms. And that means sunrise before screenrise, getting connected with nature, this prayer walk, as I've described, where there's some quietness and there's also some prayers that I repeat. Because even in that routine, and I think this is a reason some people pray the rosary and so forth, there's something kind of, like a mantra. There's something about it that kind of relaxes the nervous system and helps us get to a different plane. And I just think in this day and age, you were mentioning earlier, our screens, we are far too entertained and far too little engaged with real life. So I'm trying to flip the script on that. Do I use media? Absolutely. That's how you and I connected probably, but I use it as a tool and I make sure I own it and it doesn't own me. And starting my day on my own terms gives me some stillness. And then at the end of the day too. So I make an effort not only to have good light hygiene, as I was suggesting earlier, by having
Hmm.
red light or wearing blue blockers, but I get away from my screen an hour or two before bed and I just take in good things. I read things that are uplifting to me.
Hmm.
Again, in anyone's day, however busy and hectic or challenging it is just even to get out of bed for some, right? Wherever you are, there are things that are going to assail us. And so how can we meet those with resilience and positivity? I think in part it's how we bookend our day. So that's one way I do it.
Yeah, yeah, that's lovely. And I love how you meet yourself where you're at. I mean, it took me a long time to get to a place where I could be truly still. And now my like twice a day meditation and prayer time is like non-negotiable wellness. I like crave it now where I used to be so terrified of being still, but like meeting yourself where you're at. Like, okay, maybe you don't actually sit in stillness. Maybe you're walking, right? But you're practicing being so present that it creates a stillness, or maybe, your mind is too busy for it to be fully quiet, but you repeat a mantra or repeat a prayer or a chant or something, and that starts to cultivate stillness. So there's so many ways to meet yourself where you're at and start to get the benefits.
There are, and I think sometimes you were saying something about light earlier. I think we take ourselves far too seriously. So
Yes.
I found this book in a thrift store, I'm sure. I don't even remember the author's name, but it has made a profound impact on my spirituality. It's called Games for the Soul. And
Okay.
I liked it because this guy, actually, the author drew how can I say it? Like ideas from different spiritual expressions, from Buddhists, from
Okay.
Christians, from Jews, and so forth. And
Yeah.
I just found it so encouraging to think of it as a game. So, in other words, it's not like I must pass this test and be still for 15 minutes and then, repeat the right mantra. No, it was like every day you could do a different game. And now I'm making myself want
Yeah.
to pick up the book again. But like it had things in there like it talked about the Jewish prayer of Dayenu. And I think during the Passover, if I'm mistaken, please somebody correct me in the comments. But I think during the Passover, the Jews would recite a back and forth where some would say, like, if God had only delivered us from the hands of Pharaoh, and everyone says, Dayenu, it would have been enough. If he had only given us manna from heaven, Dayenu, it would have been enough. If he had only parted the Red Sea, Dayenu, it would have been enough. And I love this so much because it helps me be grateful for the small things. If I had only had that one meal I had today, which I just had lunch, which was like eggs and liverwurst and cheese and stuff. Well, Dayenu, that was enough.
Yeah.
I'm overflowing with gratitude with that exercise. And then another exercise was like tuning in the dial to WLUV, like if it was a radio station instead of WKVCH, where you're like just complaining all day, right? And so I don't know.
Okay.
Even this morning, I used some of these exercises. One was, he goes, here's a really simple prayer. Pray for people specifically to be happy, to be free from suffering, to be at peace. So I went through the names of my family members. I was like, may that person be happy.
Mm.
May they be free from suffering. May they be at peace. And then I pray it for myself too. And so don't be afraid to have fun with your, spirituality or whatever you're looking for. It could be anything as simple as a little note by your bed, Dayenu. And it's not spelled like die and you, although that's not a bad concept. It's got another different little spelling. But, writing things down that will remind you, oh, yeah, as I lay my head on the pillow tonight, let me just think about what I'm thankful for. Again, I'm
Yeah.
rewiring my brain for an expectation of positive things. And I think that's healing in and of itself.
Yeah, yeah, I love positing as like a game because I think people have so much expectation of a result. Like, okay, if I do this thing, this will happen. And then, of course, life is life. And it
Yes.
doesn't always happen, right? But thinking of it as like, oh, this is just something I'm practicing. It's just an activity I'm doing. It's just a game I'm doing. Like, yeah, I love how that brings some lightness to it. Well, oh my goodness, this has been so lovely. I guess I'm curious. You've told so many great stories already, but if you were to maybe bring just a last little nugget of something that you've learned in some of your travels from some of these traditional cultures that you think people in the West and the more industrialized world could benefit from, is there any kind of last nugget that you would share?
Yes, it was from my most recent trip. I went to Mexico. I
Okay.
went to Oaxaca, which is really far down in Mexico. And that's the best way I can describe it. My geography skills are not the queen. I'm not the queen of it. But anyway, so in Oaxaca, it is known as kind of a cradle of traditional foods.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference emceeing, and as you know, I do like to get off the beaten path, like Dr. Price. So I was like, okay, this is great that I'm in this like traditional city, but I want to go find the abuelas. I want to go find a grandmother somewhere out there. And a friend of mine told me, oh, Hilda, there's this grandmother who started this little restaurant in this neighboring town, blah, blah, blah. So, my husband and I, grabbed a taxi, made our way over there, and we did have like, yeah, grasshoppers and blood tacos and all these things. It was
Oh, wow.
amazing food wise. It was
Yeah.
amazing. But the coolest story happened as we were leaving. So we were kind of dropped off in the middle of nowhere. I asked the taxi driver, hey, can you pick us up? Can you wait for us? He's like, no, but you can probably take one of these little like moto taxis down to the main drag and catch a taxi there. Anyway, long story short, when we were done eating, we were almost stranded. But we met this man there, and he's like, yeah, my family and I, this is our first time coming here too, to this place off the beaten path. It's actually called Maíz Cocina Tradicional. So this woman has actually an official restaurant name, even though it's dirt floors and the whole shebang still. So Maíz Cocina Tradicional. So this man was like, hey, this was our first time here too, my wife and my daughter, but we'll give you a ride. The next thing we knew, we were hopping in a car with this family we don't even know. And they were taking us down to the main drag. The mom invited me to their house. I have her phone number the next time we come to Mexico. And I thought, it is not to be underestimated, Jen, the importance of connection with each other. I know that when people are very sick, they can get isolated. So do whatever you can to find community, even if it's online. That's okay. That's good. It's better than nothing, because we need each other desperately. The touch of a hand, the embrace of a person, the words of encouragement, you can at least have those digitally. But if you're on your own, you weren't meant to be alone. I think you were meant to be supported in community, just like my friends down in Ecuador during COVID, just like this family that stepped in to kind of rescue us from our, kind of being far off the beaten path. Like, we need each other. And I'm sure, Jen, your community knows this, but, Jen is there for you. I'm here for you. My mission in life is to support people so they can at least get to the starting line of healing and then go beyond that to where you're living your most vibrant, healthy life. That is my hope for you, because it is definitely what I'm experiencing, and I want that for everyone right now.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, holistichilda.com, correct?
Yes, people can find me there. I've got a
Yeah.
community actually that I'm launching because I want to help people also in that way and have us be connected more profoundly. I'm going to have a private podcast on there. It's called the Holistic Hub, so people can find out about that on my website. I've got the Holistic Hilda Instagram, where I love to put out content to encourage people, and I've got my YouTube channel, and of course the Wise Traditions podcast.
Yes, and you have the six ancestral course. Is that what is that called again?
Six Ancestral Secrets. It's so fun. It's kind of like
secrets. Okay.
I say it's like part course, part challenge, like 75 hard, I'm like, it's like that, but it's a little easier and it's also more fun. And what I do is I just give people the basics about sunlight, sleep, shivers, sustenance, strength, and spirit, some of which we covered in today's conversation, but it opens and sells for just a couple times a year. So people can find out more on my website as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time and the wisdom you share. Such a lovely conversation.
It's been a blessing. Thanks for having me on, Jen.
Of course.